After 30 years of being made to feel small, one public humiliation was the final straw. This is the story of a 55-year-old woman who walked away from her marriage and found a new life in Europe. My dear ones, your feedback means so much to me. Please let me know where you're watching from and whether you enjoyed this story. It's truly, truly important to me. Thank you so much. And now, let's begin the story of our heroine, whose life was changed forever by one unexpected twist of fate.
My husband, Richard, has a bad habit of forgetting who's in the room. He gets comfortable, lets his guard down, and the casual cruelty that I've learned to live with over 30 years of marriage slips out for everyone to see. That Saturday night at the Hendersons' annual dinner party, when he looked me dead in the eye and called me old and stupid in front of our dearest friends, he thought he was just performing for his usual audience of people too polite to call him out. He had no idea that a quiet stranger was sitting in the corner, a man named Arthur, a friend of the Hendersons visiting from out of town, a man who heard every single venomous word. Richard thought he was ending my night with a familiar sting of humiliation. He had no clue he was actually starting my new life. If you knew what Arthur said to me later that evening, as I was hiding in the kitchen trying to compose myself, you'd understand that my husband's biggest mistake wasn't just his cruelty. It was his carelessness. This is the story of how one man's casual insult became another man's opportunity, and my unexpected liberation. The party was in full swing. The Hendersons' home was filled with the warm buzz of conversation, the clinking of wine glasses, and the scent of Martha Henderson's famous slow-roasted brisket. I loved these parties. It was a chance to feel like me, Valerie, the retired teacher, the book club enthusiast, the woman with opinions, not just Richard's wife, a role that had increasingly come to mean his silent, nodding accessory. Richard was holding court, as usual, telling a loud, embellished story about a business deal, making himself sound like a titan of industry instead of a mid-level sales manager a few years from retirement. I smiled and nodded, the dutiful wife, while my mind wandered. The conversation shifted to current events, a new controversial book that was topping the bestseller lists. I had just finished it for my book club, and I felt a spark of my old self, the passionate English teacher, ignite. I just don't think the author's central thesis holds up, I offered, jumping into the conversation. His argument is based on a flawed premise from the very first chapter. He stopped, mid-laugh, and looked at me with a performative, patronizing smile. "Oh, honey," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, loud enough for the whole table to hear. "Let the grown-ups talk, okay? What would you know about economic theory? You're getting old and stupid." Silence. A sudden, dead, and absolute silence fell over the table. Our friends, the Hendersons, the Jacksons, all stared down at their plates, their faces frozen in awkward discomfort. The words just hung there in the air, ugly and undeniable, old and stupid. He hadn't just dismissed my opinion, he had dismissed my entire being in one casual, cruel swipe. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, a flush of pure, white-hot humiliation. I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. I looked at Richard, who was already turning back to his audience, basking in the uncomfortable silence as if it were a spotlight. He'd done this before, in smaller ways. At home, a casual, "What would you know?" here, a dismissive, "Don't be ridiculous, Valerie," there. But never like this, never so publicly, never in front of the people whose friendship I cherished. I mumbled something about needing to help Martha in the kitchen and fled from the table, my heart hammering, my dignity in tatters. I stood by the kitchen counter gripping the cool granite, trying to breathe, trying not to let the tears fall. That's when he appeared in the doorway, the quiet stranger, Arthur. He was a tall man, around my age, with kind, intelligent eyes and a gentle demeanor. He wasn't looking at me with pity. He was looking at me with a kind of quiet, profound understanding that was more comforting than any words could be. He didn't say, "Are you okay?" He knew I wasn't. Instead, he said, his voice low and calm, "For what it's worth, I read that book, and your analysis of its flawed premise was spot on. I was just thinking the same thing." I looked up at him, surprised. The tears I'd been holding back finally welled in my eyes. It was such a small thing, but it was everything. He hadn't just offered comfort, he had offered me validation. He had acknowledged my intelligence in the very moment my husband had tried to publicly strip it from me. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice choked. He's a fool, you know, to have a woman with a mind like yours beside him and not see it as his greatest asset. A complete and utter fool. We stood there, in the quiet of the kitchen, for a few moments, the sound of the party a distant, muffled buzz. He told me he was a retired architect, a widower, visiting the Hendersons for the week. We talked about books, about architecture, about life. And in those 10 minutes, I felt more seen, more respected, and more intellectually alive than I had in the last 10 years of my marriage. When I finally composed myself and returned to the table, something inside me had shifted. The humiliation was still there, but it was now overlaid with a new, unfamiliar feeling, a sense of possibility. I looked at my husband, Richard, still holding court, oblivious, and I didn't see the man I had loved for 30 years. I saw a small, insecure man who had to belittle his wife to feel big. And then I looked across the table, at Arthur, who gave me a small, discreet, encouraging smile. And I saw something else entirely. I saw a new conversation waiting to be had. My husband's biggest mistake wasn't what he said. It was that he said it in front of the one man in the room who was actually listening. And in doing so, he hadn't just started a fight. He had introduced me to his replacement.
The ride home with Richard was a masterclass in psychological warfare. He didn't apologize. He didn't even acknowledge the crater he had blown in the middle of our friend's dinner party. Instead, he was sullen, radiating a hostile silence that was meant to make me feel guilty for his own bad behavior. For years, this tactic had worked. I would have been the one to break the silence, to apologize for making things awkward, to smooth his ruffled feathers. Not tonight. I sat in the passenger seat, looked out at the passing lights of the city, and for the first time, I said nothing. The silence was his to own, and it was choking him. "Well, I hope you're happy," he finally snapped as we pulled into our driveway. "You and your little book report completely derailed the evening." I turned to look at him in the dim light of the car. "I expressed an opinion, Richard. You're the one who called your wife of 30 years old and stupid in front of our best friends." "It was a joke," he said, his voice rising, a little teasing. "You've just gotten so sensitive in your old age. You can't take a joke anymore." Old age. There it was again. His favorite weapon, the dismissal, the casual cruelty disguised as a jest. And in that moment, something inside me, something I thought had died long ago, hardened into a diamond. "No, Richard," I said, my voice as calm and cold as a frozen lake. "I haven't gotten sensitive. I've just gotten tired. Tired of you, tired of your jokes, tired of being made to feel small so you can feel big." I got out of the car, walked into the house, and went straight into the guest bedroom, closing the door firmly behind me. It was a small act, but it was a declaration. The dynamic of our marriage had just experienced a seismic shift, and he had no idea. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, not in tears, but in a state of strange, exhilarating clarity. The brief conversation with Arthur in the kitchen replayed in my mind. He hadn't offered pity. He had offered respect. He had seen my mind, my intelligence, and had validated it at the exact moment my husband had tried to erase it. It was like a splash of cold, clean water on the face of a woman who hadn't realized she was dying of thirst. I knew my marriage was over. It hadn't ended with Richard's insult. It had ended with my realization that I deserved better than a life of being belittled. The insult was just the final ugly nail in a coffin that had been building for years. The next morning, I found a note on the kitchen counter. "Gone to golf. We'll talk later." He was running away, expecting me to be contrite and apologetic by the time he returned, ready to smooth things over as I always had. He was in for a surprise. As I was drinking my coffee, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number.
Valerie, it's Arthur. Martha Henderson gave me your number. I hope you don't mind. I just wanted to say it was a genuine pleasure meeting you last night. I can't stop thinking about our conversation about that book. It's not often one meets a mind that sharp. My heart did a little flip. I read the message twice, a slow smile spreading across my face. I typed back, my fingers surprisingly steady. The pleasure was all mine, Arthur. Thank you for your kindness. It meant more than you know. His reply was almost immediate. Kindness has nothing to do with it. It was just the truth. I'm only in town for 2 more days. I know this is forward, but would you allow me to take you to lunch today? There's a little Italian place I've been wanting to try. Lunch? With another man? While I was still, technically, a married woman. The old Valerie would have been scandalized, would have politely refused. The new Valerie? She typed back, I would love that. That lunch was a revelation. We sat for 3 hours talking about everything and nothing. Books, architecture, our past lives, our children. He had a grown daughter he was very proud of. Our dreams for the future, or in my case, the dreams I was only just now daring to have. He listened to me. He asked questions. He laughed at my jokes. He made me feel brilliant, vibrant, alive. He was everything Richard was not. Curious, respectful, and genuinely interested in who I was as a person, not just as an accessory to his own life. Walking away from that lunch, my mind was made up. There was no going back to the beige world of my marriage. Arthur was leaving town soon, and I had no idea if I would ever see him again. But it didn't matter. He had already given me the greatest gift, the reflection of a woman I wanted to be. When I got home, Richard was there, expecting a subdued wife ready to apologize. He found something else entirely. I had spent the hour after lunch packing a suitcase. I had also made a phone call to a divorce lawyer whose number I'd had saved for over a year, just in case. So are you ready to talk now and apologize for making a scene? Richard asked, his tone magnanimous, as if he was the one offering forgiveness. Yes, Richard, I'm ready to talk, I said, walking into the living room with my suitcase in my hand. I'm leaving you. My lawyer will be in touch tomorrow with the details. The look on his face, the sheer sputtering, uncomprehending shock, was a sight to behold. He was speechless. For the first time in 30 years, I had left him utterly speechless. Leaving me? What are you talking about? Where are you going? I'm going to go find out what the rest of my life looks like, without you in it. I walked out the front door, leaving him standing there in stunned silence. I didn't know exactly where I was going yet. A hotel for now, then a new apartment, a new life. But for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't looking back. I was looking forward.
The first few weeks of my new life were a whirlwind of terrifying freedom. I rented a small, sunny apartment in a part of town I'd always loved, filled it with books and plants, and learned the simple, profound joy of waking up in a home where no one was going to diminish me before I'd even had my first cup of coffee. Richard, of course, did not make it easy. He went through all the classic stages of a narcissist whose favorite toy has suddenly grown legs and walked away. First came the angry, demanding phone calls. What is this nonsense, Valerie? This little tantrum of yours has gone on long enough. Come home. When that didn't work, he switched to pleading. I miss you, Val. The house is so empty. It was just a stupid joke. I'm sorry. When I referred him to my lawyer, the threats began. He threatened to drain our joint accounts, which my lawyer, thankfully, had already advised me to freeze. Threatened to tell our friends I was having a mental breakdown, but his threats had lost their power over me. They were just the desperate buzzing of a fly trapped in a jar. My true lifeline, my source of strength during this tumultuous time, was Arthur.
He had returned to Chicago, but we spoke every single night, video calls that stretched for hours. He'd show me the architectural models he was working on in his study, and I'd show him the new blooms in my small container garden on the balcony. We talked about everything: our pasts, our children, our fears, our quiet hopes for what remained of our lives. He never offered advice about Richard unless I asked. He simply listened. A quiet, steady presence that made me feel safe and respected. He was interested in my thoughts, not just on books, but on everything. He saw the woman Richard had tried so hard to make invisible, and he treated her not just with kindness, but with genuine admiration. Our connection, forged over a shared moment of righteous indignation, was deepening into a profound, mature love built on a foundation of mutual respect. As the divorce proceedings lumbered on, I found myself not just surviving, but thriving. I started volunteering at a local adult literacy program, rediscovering the passion for teaching I had given up when I married Richard. Helping another adult learn to read, seeing the pride and joy on their face as they deciphered their first full sentence, gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. My world, which had been so small, was expanding in ways I had never imagined. About 3 months after I'd left Richard, Arthur called me with a proposal. "Valerie," he said, his voice warm and a little nervous, "I have to go to Spain for a month. I'm consulting on the restoration of an old monastery in Andalusia. It's a fascinating project." "That sounds wonderful, Arthur," I said, a pang of longing in my heart. "It would be more wonderful if you were there with me. Come with me, Valerie. Let me show you the Alhambra by moonlight. Let's drink wine in Seville and listen to flamenco guitar. Let's start our life together, not just through a screen, but out in the real world, the beautiful world." My breath caught. It was a bold, beautiful, terrifying invitation. The old Valerie would have found 100 reasons to say no. It was too soon, too impulsive, too expensive. But the new Valerie, the woman who had lunch with a handsome stranger and walked out on a 30-year marriage, just smiled. "I've never seen Spain." "I know," he replied softly. "It's time we change that." Richard's reaction when my lawyer informed his lawyer that I would be out of the country for the next month was, I was told, apoplectic. The idea of me not just leaving him, but living a grand romantic life without him was a blow from which his ego could not recover. He settled the divorce quickly after that, his fight gone, leaving him alone in that big, quiet house with nothing but his own bitterness for company. I met Arthur in Madrid. And as we stood together in the Prado Museum, hand in hand, looking at a Goya painting, I knew I was home. Not in a place, but with a person. He was the someone else who had been listening that night. He had heard my husband's cruel dismissal, but he had also heard the intelligent, passionate woman underneath. He hadn't just stood up for me, he had seen me. And that had made all the difference. My husband's biggest mistake wasn't just who else was listening. His biggest mistake was in thinking that I had forgotten to listen to myself. And my new life was just beginning.
Spain was not a country. It was a state of being. It was the scent of orange blossoms in a hidden courtyard in Seville, the passionate, guttural cry of a flamenco singer that spoke directly to my own long silent soul, the taste of rich, red wine shared with Arthur on a balcony overlooking the ancient rooftops of Granada. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living according to a schedule, a budget, or someone else's expectations. I was simply living, and every moment was a revelation. Our month in Andalusia was a waking dream. Arthur was a wonderful travel companion, his quiet enthusiasm and deep knowledge of history and architecture bringing every cathedral, every fortress, every winding cobblestone street to life. But more than that, he was a wonderful partner. He didn't just show me places. He saw me. He listened to my thoughts on art, on life, on the books we read in the quiet afternoons. He celebrated my mind, a thing my own husband had treated as a quaint, slightly annoying appliance. With Arthur, I felt not just loved, but admired, respected. The woman who had been called old and stupid was now being told she was brilliant and fascinating. And the most incredible part? I was starting to believe it.
Our apartment in Lisbon overlooks a small, tiled plaza where a single jacaranda tree explodes in a riot of purple blossoms every spring. It's been 3 years since I walked out of my old life, and sometimes, sitting here on our small balcony with a cup of strong coffee and a plate of pastéis de nata, that old life feels like a story I read about someone else. The beige walls, the silent dinners, the constant low-grade humiliation, it's all a world away, a ghost that no longer has the power to haunt me. Life with Arthur is easy. Not in a boring or complacent way, but in the way a river flows easily to the sea. It's a partnership built on a foundation of respect that still, after all this time, takes my breath away. He travels often for his restoration work to crumbling monasteries in Portugal, ancient villas in Tuscany, forgotten chateaux in France, and sometimes I go with him, my old passion for history reawakened by his deep knowledge and infectious enthusiasm. Other times, I am perfectly content to stay here, in our sun-drenched apartment, living my own, separate, equally fulfilling life. I didn't just become Arthur's travel companion, I became Valerie again. I rediscovered the woman who loved to teach. I started a small, informal English conversation group for some of the older residents in our neighborhood, mostly widows like me, who wanted to practice their English. We'd meet twice a week in a local cafe, laughing and stumbling over verb tenses, sharing stories of our children, our pasts, our quiet hopes for the future. They didn't know the specifics of my story, but they understood the language of second chances. Through teaching them, I found a new community, a new purpose. I also started an online book club, the Wandering Readers, I called it. A group of women from all over the world, most of them over 50, who, like me, felt their minds were still sharp and hungry for intelligent conversation. We'd read challenging books, debate literary theory, and share our own life stories, our own wisdom. The quiet teacher who had been dismissed by her husband now had a global classroom, her voice heard and respected by women from Sydney to Seattle. I heard about Richard once. A Christmas card from our old friends, the Hendersons. It was a brief, sad little note at the bottom of their family update. Richard had sold the house, they said, and had retired. He was living alone, seemed quiet, bitter, and had lost touch with most of their old friend group. His world, once so loud and full of his own self-importance, had shrunk. A part of me felt a flicker of something, not pity, not triumph, but a kind of detached, melancholy acknowledgement. He had built his life on the smallness of others, and when I refused to be small anymore, his foundation had crumbled. I wished him no ill. I simply didn't think of him at all anymore. He was a closed book on a dusty shelf in a library I no longer visited. Arthur came home last night from a trip to Greece. He brought me a small, simple gift, a string of smooth, sea-worn, blue glass beads, the color of the Aegean Sea. He said, "They reminded me of your eyes when you're happy." He fastened the clasp around my neck. Later that evening, we sat on the balcony, a bottle of crisp Vinho Verde between us, the lights of Lisbon twinkling below. We weren't talking, just enjoying the comfortable silence, listening to the distant sounds of a fado singer from a nearby restaurant. I thought back to that night at the Hendersons' dinner party, the night my world had cracked open. I thought about the humiliation, the pain. And then I thought about the man who had appeared in the kitchen doorway, the man who had seen me, truly seen me, and offered me not pity, but respect.
My husband's biggest mistake was who else was listening, yes, but my biggest victory was not the life I found with Arthur, as wonderful as it is. It was the life I found within myself. Arthur didn't save me. He simply opened a door and reminded me that I had the strength to walk through it on my own. He turned to me, his hand covering mine, his eyes full of the deep, quiet love that was now the bedrock of my world. He said, "What are you thinking about, my love?" I smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached my eyes and filled my heart. I said, "I was just thinking, looking out at the beautiful, wide-open world before me, that this is a very good book, and I can't wait to see what happens in the next chapter."